Imagine a world where power is not measured in armies or fortresses, but in shadows and whispers, where assassins are not just hired killers, but strategic weapons that destabilize entire empires. From the dark alleys of ancient cities to the opulent palaces of kings, covert operations have shaped the course of history in ways that still haunt the political landscape today. This is the story of the ancient assassination organizations that terrified the world, and their methods that still resonate in modern times. Let's begin with top one. Top at one, the Hashashin, Nizarius Milas. In the heart of the medieval Middle East, nestled high in the Alborz Mountains, lay a fortress so impregnable it was said to be untouchable. This was Alamut, the stronghold of the Nizarius Milas, also known as the Hashashin, a name that would instill fear across kingdoms and empires for centuries. But Alamut wasn't just a physical fortress. It was a symbol of a covert system that used calculated violence to alter the course of history. The Hashashin were not an army in the traditional sense. They didn't engage in large-scale battles or sieges. Instead, they relied on something far more insidious: patience. Their warriors, known as assassins, were trained in secrecy, infiltration, and assassination. Operatives would embed themselves in society, working as servants, scribes, or traders, often for years, before striking with deadly precision at high-ranking political figures. Their weapons were not swords or arrows, but daggers, small, silent, and effective at close range. What made them so terrifying was their ability to operate under the radar, moving freely through cities and palaces where they could be trusted servants or mere strangers in a crowd. Their ultimate goal wasn't simply to kill, it was to manipulate entire empires through fear. One death, strategically placed, could shift alliances, fracture kingdoms, and bring down rulers who thought themselves untouchable. The most infamous story of the Hashashin's power comes from the assassination of Vizier Nizam al-Mulk in 1092. He was one of the most powerful men in the Seljuk Empire, yet his death came swiftly with no warning in a public place. The assassin, a member of the Hashashin, walked into a bustling crowd, approached the vizier, and killed him with a single thrust of his dagger. As he was captured, he showed no fear, no panic, only the quiet certainty of a man who had done his duty. This wasn't just an assassination, it was a message. The Hashashin had made their mark on the Seljuk Empire, not with a force of arms, but with a force of ideas. They used assassination as a political tool, one that didn't just strike at an individual, but at the very concept of security, leaving rulers paranoid and fearful that anyone around them could be a deadly agent. But the Hashashin's story didn't end with their defeat at the hands of the Mongols in 1256. Their methods, though dismantled physically, would live on in the annals of history, inspiring countless other shadowy organizations. How could an organization with no formal army, no visible power, leave such a lasting legacy? Was it fear? Was it the calculated discipline they employed? The answer lies in the nature of their operations: quiet, effective, and terrifying in its simplicity. Top 2, the Sicarii. In the bustling streets of ancient Jerusalem, under the watchful eyes of the Roman Empire, a quiet threat was growing. Unlike the mighty legions that marched in columns and wielded iron and shields, this organization used stealth and proximity as its weapons. They were the Sicarii, a group so disciplined and so secretive that they struck fear into the heart of Rome itself. Their name comes from the sica, a short, curved dagger that could easily be hidden beneath a cloak, making them masters of assassination. In 66 CE, during the Jewish festival of Passover, one of the most infamous attacks took place. A Roman official visiting Jerusalem suddenly fell to the ground, blood spreading across his robes. The killer was gone before anyone realized what had happened. The crowd, seething with tension, was unaware that the assassin had already vanished into the masses, leaving no trace behind but a single death and a sense of panic that would reverberate throughout the city for years. The strength of the Sicarii wasn't in numbers. It wasn't in their weapons. It was in their ability to blend in. They moved seamlessly through the streets, amongst the crowds, and even within the religious gatherings where the Romans couldn't keep a tight watch. The Sicarii didn't fight openly. They fought by causing fear, by creating a sense of unease in the very people who thought themselves invincible. Flavius Josephus, the ancient historian, described them as zealots, but their tactics went beyond the passion of a mob. The Sicarii were organized. They operated in cells and each member knew their role. They didn't just kill randomly, they targeted Roman officials, collaborators, and local elites who were seen as complicit in the Roman occupation. Each death, though seemingly random, was a calculated strike designed to shake the confidence of the Roman authorities. What made them so difficult to deal with was that they didn't have a central base of operations. They didn't hide behind fortresses or walls. The Sicari's power came from being embedded within the very fabric of society, in plain sight. A single operative could be a shopkeeper by day and an assassin by night, blending in seamlessly with the population and making their movements impossible to track. Despite the Roman Empire's best efforts, patrols, public executions, and the cultivation of informants, the Sicarii continued to strike, their attacks getting under the skin of the Romans who feared their very presence. The psychological impact of their tactics was felt not just in the streets, but deep within the Roman bureaucracy. The question wasn't just who was killing the officials, it was who could be trusted anymore. When the Romans finally crushed the rebellion at Masada in 73 CE, they believed the Sicarii had been eradicated, but the methods they employed lived on. Even as the empire grew stronger and more entrenched, the idea of an invisible network, operating in silence and striking at will, would become a model for covert operations in the centuries that followed. What was it about the Sicarii that made them so resilient? Was it their ability to remain invisible, to strike with precision, or was it their deep understanding of psychological warfare? Top 3. The Fatimid Intelligence Network. In the heart of medieval Cairo, beneath the grandeur of the Fatimid Caliphate, a quiet and deadly network was at work. While the Caliphate ruled over a vast territory with an intricate political system, a shadowy force operated right under its nose. This was the Fatimid Intelligence Network, a sophisticated and secretive organization that infiltrated the very heart of the Fatimid court and eliminated key figures with surgical precision. The Fatimids, known for their opulence and powerful rule, had created a system of governance that seemed impenetrable. Layers of chamberlains, guards, scribes, and advisors controlled access to the caliph, creating a fortress around the throne. But within this seemingly secure palace, the seeds of destruction were being sown, quietly, invisibly, and with patience. The members of the Fatimid Intelligence Network were not mercenaries or foreign agents. They were trusted insiders, selected for their loyalty and ideological commitment. Many began their service as young recruits, entering the palace in humble roles, servants, clerks, or attendants, and over time, they worked their way closer to the center of power. It wasn't a quick infiltration. It was a gradual process, requiring years of quiet observation and unwavering discipline. The Fatimids, unaware of the growing threat inside their own walls, relied on what they thought were impenetrable systems of trust. But the reality was far different. Operatives in the network were trained to manipulate information, to use poison discreetly, and to execute orders with subtlety. Poisoned cups of sherbet, seemingly innocent, could carry death without suspicion. A ruler might fall ill within days, and his sudden demise would be attributed to natural causes or divine will, with no questions asked. What was truly remarkable about this intelligence network was its compartmentalization. Operatives didn't communicate openly. They didn't need to. Information was passed through coded messages, whispers in hallways, and controlled channels of communication. If one operative was captured or eliminated, the broader network would remain intact. There was no central base, no headquarters to target. Instead, the Fatimid Empire was subtly undermined from within by individuals who knew how to blend into the very fabric of the system. The eventual disappearance of key figures in the Fatimid court left the empire vulnerable to internal instability. The question remained, how could such a well-established system of governance fall victim to quiet, invisible forces within? The Fatimids, with their vast resources and power, had no way of responding to a network that was as much a part of their court as their own officials. The Fatimid Intelligence Network is an example of how internal infiltration can be even more dangerous than an external invasion. When a state is built on trust, it is the manipulation of that trust that can bring it to its knees. What made this network so effective? Was it their control over information, their methodical execution, or was it their ability to thrive within the very structures they were designed to tear down? Top 4. The Shinobi Ninja of Iga. In the mist-covered mountains of Japan, a quiet but deadly force moved through the shadows, unseen by most, yet feared by all. This was the legendary shinobi, often romanticized as the ninja, though their true strength lay not in flamboyant stunts or flashy stealth, but in their methodical and strategic approach to warfare. Unlike the samurai, whose honor and skill were often displayed on the battlefield, the shinobi worked in the shadows, where their mission was to gather intelligence, sabotage, and eliminate threats, sometimes without even drawing attention to their presence. In the 16th century, one of the most notable groups of these covert operatives came from the province of Iga. This small, mountainous area would become home to some of the most highly trained shinobi in all of Japan. What made them particularly dangerous wasn't just their ability to move through the forests and villages unnoticed, but their distributed network and specialized knowledge. The Eiga shinobi were not a monolithic force. They operated in small, tight-knit families, each with its own expertise, and communicated across generations through oral tradition. The strength of the Eiga shinobi lay in their ability to infiltrate and gather intelligence without ever revealing their true purpose. While samurai trained in the art of combat, the shinobi honed their skills in the arts of disguise, deception, and psychological manipulation. They could move unnoticed within merchant caravans, religious pilgrimages, or even the court of a rival lord. This made them invaluable to feudal lords who wanted to keep an eye on their enemies without raising suspicion. One of the most famous examples of the Eiga shinobi's effectiveness came in the late 16th century, when the warlord Oda Nobunaga launched an attack on the region. With an army of samurai and soldiers, Nobunaga expected a swift victory. But the shinobi of Eiga had something that Nobunaga's army didn't: knowledge. Nobunaga's forces, though large, were vulnerable to constant disruption. Scouts disappeared, troops were ambushed, entire supply lines were severed. It wasn't the direct confrontation that caused the most damage, it was the constant uncertainty. The shinobi of Eiga didn't engage in open battle, but instead targeted key vulnerabilities, sowing discord and confusion wherever they went. The stress on Nobunaga's forces was psychological as much as it was tactical. Despite Nobunaga's overwhelming forces, the shinobi of Eiga remained resilient. The campaign against them stretched on, and although Nobunaga eventually returned with a more massive army to break the resistance, the shinobi's ability to adapt and disappear proved the greatest strength of all. The Eiga shinobi were ultimately a decentralized network. Unlike traditional armies that relied on a command structure, the shinobi operated in families and small units, each one able to function independently. This decentralized structure made them incredibly difficult to dismantle. If one operative was captured, the larger network continued to operate, blending seamlessly into the surrounding community. The shinobi's legacy didn't end with their defeat. Their skills were absorbed by other factions, and their tactics became an integral part of modern intelligence networks. The Eiga shinobi weren't just a group of warriors. They were a system, a culture, and a strategy that survived not through force, but through adaptability and knowledge. How did the Eiga shinobi maintain such a flexible and resilient system in a time of war? Was it their ability to adapt to their environment, or was there something deeper about their connection to the land and its people? Top 5. The Koga shinobi. While the Eiga shinobi were renowned for their decentralized networks and guerrilla tactics, the Koga shinobi operated under a different yet equally effective structure. Located in the neighboring region of Koga, these covert operatives were known for their deep integration within society, blending into the everyday life of Japan while maintaining the ability to strike swiftly when the moment called for it. Unlike their Eiga counterparts, the Koga shinobi were not just focused on gathering intelligence or sabotage. They became masters of infiltration, leveraging their connections to move through rival domains without raising suspicion. The Koga shinobi were not a single entity, but a loose network of families, each with its own specialties. What made them so formidable was their flexibility. They didn't just act as a singular unit, they embedded themselves within the political and social fabric of different clans, finding employment as scouts, guards, spies, or even trusted servants in the courts of powerful warlords. This ability to blend into any environment made them invaluable to those who could afford their services and terrifying to those who crossed them. One of the most significant differences between the Koga shinobi and their Iga counterparts was their method of training. Whereas the Iga shinobi passed down their knowledge through oral traditions, the Koga shinobi kept their secrets within families, with each generation inheriting the skills necessary for survival. This method of family-based training ensured that the Koga's expertise in espionage, sabotage, and assassination remained firmly rooted in their cultural practices, making their operatives some of the most well-trained and deadly in feudal Japan. The Koga shinobi didn't need large networks or armies to operate effectively. Instead, their power lay in their individual operatives, who, once inserted into rival domains, could gather intelligence, influence decisions, and even eliminate targets when the time was right. These operatives were trained not only in stealth, but also in social skills, understanding local customs, dialects, and traditions. This made them invisible, able to slip into the fabric of any society without being detected, their missions carried out with precision and secrecy. The Koga shinobi's decentralized structure made them difficult to target. While the Iga operated as a collective, the Koga were embedded in multiple domains, with no clear central command that could be attacked. Each family operated as an autonomous unit, able to make decisions independently, but still linked to the overall Koga network. This made them incredibly resilient, able to adapt to changing circumstances and survive long after their enemies had targeted their visible operatives. By the early 17th century, the necessity for these covert networks began to wane as Japan moved toward a more centralized government under Tokugawa Ieyasu. Yet, even as the need for independent shinobi diminished, the Koga's methods continued to influence modern intelligence gathering. Their focus on adaptability, loyalty, and infiltration would lay the groundwork for future intelligence operations across the world. What set the Koga apart was not just their ability to remain invisible, but their strategic approach to survival. They didn't just hide, they thrived in the shadows, manipulating the system from within, often undetected, until it was too late for their enemies to fight back. What made the Koga shinobi so effective at disguising themselves within other societies? Was it their deep cultural knowledge, or was their true power the way they adapted to changing environments, always staying one step ahead? Top 6. The Thuggee Brotherhood. Imagine a vast network operating right under the noses of authorities, one that used trust as its weapon and deception as its method. This was the infamous Thuggee Brotherhood, a group whose name still sends shivers down the spine. Known for their ritualistic killings and the chilling efficiency with which they operated, the Thuggee were not simply criminals. They were strategists, using secrecy, trust manipulation, and precision to eliminate their victims with disturbing regularity. Operating primarily across the Indian subcontinent, the Thuggee were masters of infiltration. Their method was deceptively simple: blend in with the crowd, gain the trust of their target, and then strike when the moment was right. In the early 19th century, British officials began to notice an alarming pattern. Merchants and travelers would disappear without a trace, and the once ordinary trade routes became dangerous territories where seemingly friendly groups of people would offer protection before turning deadly. The method was brutal in its simplicity. Thugs would approach travelers under the pretext of camaraderie, offering food, shelter, or companionship along the perilous journey. Once trust was established, the victim would be separated from the group under a fabricated excuse, and then using a length of cloth, the thug would strangle them in one swift motion. The body would be buried in a pre-dug pit, and the caravan would continue as if nothing had happened, leaving no trace of the horrific crime. What set the Thuggee apart from ordinary bandits was their organizational structure. This wasn't a loose collection of criminals. It was a network with clearly defined roles. The Thuggee operated in teams with each member fulfilling a specific task: one to distract, another to kill, and a third to ensure the body was concealed. Their operations were efficient, coordinated, and carried out with military precision. Communication was coded, often embedded in casual conversation, allowing them to coordinate without arousing suspicion. The Thuggee Brotherhood's longevity was a testament to their resilience. They were not a gang that could be wiped out with a few raids or arrests. Their network was deeply compartmentalized, with members embedded within various segments of society, from merchants to religious pilgrims, which made it nearly impossible for authorities to infiltrate and dismantle their operations. Each cell was self-sufficient, making it difficult to trace the broader organization, even when individual members were captured. In the 1830s, British officer William Henry Sleeman led a massive campaign to dismantle the Thuggee network. Rather than relying solely on traditional military force, he used intelligence gathering and informants to penetrate the Thuggee ranks. This strategy proved far more effective, as captured members provided crucial information that helped expose the network's scale. The Thuggee were eventually suppressed, but their legacy lived on. Their ability to operate in plain sight, exploiting trust and routine, highlighted a deeper vulnerability in any system: the assumption of safety. The Thuggee are a chilling reminder that systems of covert organization can thrive under the radar, manipulating not just their victims, but the very systems meant to protect them. They proved that assumptions, the belief that companionship equals safety, can be just as dangerous as any weapon. How did the Thuggee manage to operate in plain sight for so long? Was it the reliance on trust, the manipulation of everyday expectations, or their compartmentalized structure that made them so difficult to stop? Top 7. The Bagadai Shadow Cells. In the dense forests and remote villages of ancient Gaul, a shadowy network of insurgents moved in secret, striking fear into the Roman Empire. These were the Bagadai, an elusive and decentralized group whose operations would confound the might of Rome for centuries. Unlike traditional armies that engaged in open warfare, the Bagadai used guerrilla tactics, operating in small, autonomous cells that blended seamlessly into the local population. Their power didn't come from sheer numbers. It came from intelligence, local knowledge, and a deeply ingrained sense of resilience. The Bagadai emerged during periods of economic strain and weakened central control, capitalizing on Roman imperial overreach. They didn't launch grand assaults on Roman legions or fortified cities. Instead, they targeted vulnerable imperial representatives, landowners loyal to Rome, and Roman military supply caravans. These attacks were calculated, designed not to inflict widespread destruction, but to destabilize the Roman presence in Gaul and Hispania by disrupting the empire's economic and administrative systems. What made the Bagadai so dangerous was their fluid structure. They had no central command, no headquarters to attack. Instead, they operated in small local cells led by trusted leaders who were familiar with the terrain and the local population. This decentralized approach made it nearly impossible for the Romans to target and dismantle the Bagadai network. If one group was crushed, another would emerge elsewhere, fueled by the same grievances and local knowledge. The Bagadai's tactics were subtle and effective. They didn't engage in large battles. They focused on swift, precise strikes that would have a ripple effect on Roman authority. In the rural areas of Gaul, the Bagadai were able to operate undetected for long periods. By day, they blended in with the local population, appearing as simple farmers or laborers. By night, they would come together to launch attacks, swiftly disappearing into the shadows before Roman patrols could respond. Roman authorities responded predictably. Patrols increased, executions were staged to discourage resistance, and informants were cultivated to root out the rebels. Yet these efforts were rarely successful. Each time a Bagadai cell was discovered and eliminated, another would take its place, and the network's resilience only grew stronger. The Bagadai were a persistent thorn in the side of Roman imperialism, and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances ensured their survival. The Roman response also revealed a key vulnerability. Empires rely on visibility to project power. When that visibility is compromised by invisible, decentralized networks, even the mightiest empire can find itself at a disadvantage. The Bagadai didn't need a massive army or fortresses to challenge Rome. They needed trust, local knowledge, and a sense of community that allowed them to operate effectively beneath the empire's radar. By the time Rome's authority in Western Europe began to crumble in the 5th century, the Bagadai had already proven that decentralized resistance networks could survive and thrive in the gaps between imperial control. They weren't just an insurgency, they were a living example of how distributed power could overwhelm even the most advanced military and political systems. What made the Bagadai so resilient? Was it their ability to integrate with local populations? Or was it the structural design of their network that allowed them to survive Roman attempts at eradication? Top 8. The Fedayeen. In the tumultuous political landscape of the 11th and 12th centuries, a secretive and deadly group rose to prominence within the Nizari Ismaili movement. They were the Fedayeen, a network of ideologically driven operatives who carried out targeted assassinations with chilling precision. Unlike mercenaries who fought for money, the Fedayeen fought for their beliefs, accepting death as the ultimate form of devotion. Their commitment to their cause and their discipline made them a force that struck fear into the hearts of even the most powerful rulers in the Middle East. The Fedayeen were not just hired killers, they were martyrs. Their actions were driven by a sense of spiritual duty and a commitment to their cause. They were trained to approach their targets in public or semi-public spaces, blending into the crowd like ordinary people, and eliminating their targets with a dagger in hand. The use of the dagger was symbolic, a weapon of choice that allowed for close contact and swift execution, ensuring that the victim had no time to react. The act itself was meant to be witnessed, sending a clear message to the political leaders and rulers who thought they were untouchable. What made the Fedayeen so terrifying wasn't just their willingness to die for their cause, but the systematic and methodical nature of their operations. Unlike traditional military forces that relied on large-scale confrontations, the Fedayeen worked in secrecy, compartmentalizing their cells to ensure that even if one operative was captured, the broader network would remain intact. Information was passed through controlled channels, ensuring that knowledge of broader strategies was kept hidden from outsiders. This compartmentalization was the key to their survival. Each operative acted as a separate entity, making it nearly impossible for authorities to dismantle the network. The use of disguises was also a critical element of their operations. Fedayeen operatives would often dress as traders, students, or pilgrims, gaining access to places where they could get close to their targets without raising suspicion. This ability to blend into society allowed them to operate in cities and towns without attracting attention. The Fedayeen didn't just assassinate for the sake of violence. They disrupted the status quo, sending shockwaves through the political systems they sought to challenge. Their targets were often high-ranking officials, religious leaders, and rulers who were seen as threats to their ideology. The most notable characteristic of the Fedayeen was their ideological cohesion. Their loyalty wasn't to a leader or a cause that could be overthrown, but to an idea, a belief that death was not an end, but a fulfillment of their mission. This ideological commitment gave them an unwavering sense of purpose that made them nearly impossible to defeat. The legacy of the Fedayeen lives on in the concept of the martyr assassin, where the act of killing becomes an extension of one's faith and beliefs. It also highlights a key lesson about assassination organizations. When a group is motivated by a deep sense of purpose and ideological conviction, their ability to endure and disrupt established power becomes a much greater challenge than any physical confrontation. What was it about the Fedayeen that made them so effective? Was it their unshakable belief, their discipline, or their ability to operate in secrecy that made them such a formidable force in the medieval world? Top 9. The Maratha Intelligence Network. As the Mughal Empire pushed deeper into the Deccan Plateau in the late 17th century, a small but deeply entrenched force began to disrupt their every move. This was the Maratha Intelligence Network, a decentralized system of spies, scouts, and operatives whose ability to gather intelligence and target strategic weak points made them one of the most formidable forces the Mughals would face. Unlike traditional armies that relied on physical confrontation, the Marathas waged a war of information, attacking the enemy where they were most vulnerable, their supply lines, their commanders, and their communication networks. The Maratha Confederacy, under the leadership of Shivaji Maharaj, developed a system of intelligence gathering that relied on the active involvement of the local population. Merchants, travelers, and even common villagers became vital sources of information. Their role was to move freely through Mughal-controlled territories, observing troop movements, identifying weaknesses in fortifications, and noting shifts in political allegiances. The Marathas' ability to blend into everyday life allowed them to gather crucial intelligence without arousing suspicion. One of the most striking features of the Maratha Intelligence Network was its compartmentalized nature. Unlike traditional military forces, which had a visible headquarters or command structure, the Maratha's intelligence system operated through local cells, each responsible for specific tasks such as gathering information, carrying out sabotage, or coordinating ambushes. These cells operated independently, making it extremely difficult for the Mughals to dismantle the network. If one cell was compromised or destroyed, another would quickly rise in its place, continuing the work without interruption. The Marathas' tactics were simple but effective. When the time came to strike, the operatives would use methods such as poisoning or ambushes disguised as bandit attacks. The aim was never to engage in open battle with the Mughal forces, but rather to disrupt them at critical moments. A poisoned meal could incapacitate a high-ranking officer, a carefully timed ambush could delay a supply caravan, and the sudden disappearance of a messenger could delay reinforcements for weeks. This ability to disrupt the Mughal Empire's logistical and military operations was critical in the decentralized nature of Maratha warfare. The Mughals, with their massive and heavily fortified armies, could win battles on the field, but they struggled against an opponent that didn't engage in direct confrontation. Instead, the Marathas used a war of attrition, whittling away at the Mughal Empire's resources and morale until the Mughals were stretched thin across multiple fronts. The success of the Maratha intelligence network also illustrates a key principle in covert warfare: the importance of local knowledge. By relying on their intimate knowledge of terrain and social networks, the Marathas were able to operate in ways that large conventional armies could not. The information they gathered was vital to their success, enabling them to anticipate and disrupt Mughal movements at every turn. In the end, while the Marathas would eventually face defeat in some battles, the influence of their intelligence network endured, helping to erode the Mughal Empire's ability to maintain control in the Deccan. It was a reminder that information, gathered from the shadows, carefully transmitted, and used at the right moment, can be just as powerful as any army. How did the Maratha intelligence network manage to disrupt one of the largest empires in the world without engaging in direct conflict? Was it their knowledge of the land, their decentralized structure, or their ability to use information as a weapon? Top 10. The Ottoman Bostanja Corps. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, amidst the opulence of the imperial palace, a secretive force operated quietly, carrying out the executions of officials and rivals without fanfare or ceremony. This was the Bostanja Corps, a specialized corps originally tasked with palace security and the maintenance of the gardens along the Bosphorus. But over time, their role expanded far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The Bostanja Corps became the Ottoman Empire's hidden executioners, a deadly force employed by the sultans to remove high-ranking officials with surgical precision. Unlike the more visible military forces of the Ottoman Empire, the Bostanja Corps operated within the very heart of the imperial palace, where they maintained absolute discretion. Their job was to maintain internal stability by removing officials who had fallen out of favor with the sultan, officials whose power had grown too great, whose influence threatened to disrupt the delicate balance within the empire's corridors of power. These internal executions were conducted quietly, without the public spectacle of traditional executions. A high-ranking official might be summoned to the palace under the pretext of consultation, only to meet his end in the silence of the imperial chambers. The method of execution was strangulation, a practice chosen to avoid the shedding of royal blood, a violation of the sanctity of the imperial court. The Bostanja Corps' training emphasized discretion and loyalty above all else. Members of this corps were recruited from the elite, often from the Devshirme system, where Christian boys were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained to serve the Sultan. This system of recruitment ensured that the Bostanja Corps was loyal to the throne and would not hesitate to carry out the Sultan's will, no matter how brutal. The Bostanja Corps' operations were carried out in secret, and the Sultan's enemies were often executed without anyone outside the palace knowing. The record of their actions was deliberately obscured. Historians rarely documented the names or the exact circumstances of those who were eliminated, and the lack of detailed records has only contributed to the mystique surrounding the Bostanja Corps' role in Ottoman politics. Unlike other assassination groups that operated outside the state, the Bostanja Corps worked within the system itself. They were not a rebellious force seeking to overthrow the Sultan. They were an extension of the Sultan's will, acting as a tool of coercion and political control. Their role within the empire was accepted as a necessary evil, and their actions were never questioned as long as the Sultan remained in power. The Bostanjakor's role also reflected the imperial structure of the Ottoman Empire, where absolute power was centralized in the Sultan. The Sultan didn't need to rely on external forces to eliminate rivals. He had a dedicated group of loyalists within the palace who could act when necessary, preserving the delicate balance of power. This internalized method of assassination made it difficult for any outsider to challenge the Sultan's authority, and it ensured that power remained firmly in the hands of the ruling class. While the Bostanjakor's prominence waned over time, their legacy is a reminder of the ways in which power can be exercised covertly within a state. They didn't operate in the shadows like other secret organizations, but rather as a visible yet hidden part of the imperial machinery, performing executions quietly and efficiently without the need for a public display of force. What does the existence of the Bostanjakor reveal about the nature of power within the Ottoman Empire? Can a state maintain control through such covert methods, or does it risk eroding the legitimacy of its leadership? This concludes the 10 mysterious assassination organizations that terrified the ancient world. Would you like to create a thumbnail or explore another topic? Throughout history, assassination organizations have thrived not through numbers, but through strategy, discipline, and the invisibility they maintain. Whether operating from the shadows or embedded deep within powerful systems, these groups have shaped the course of empires in ways that remain difficult to comprehend. Their legacy endures, showing us that power can be wielded in ways that are not always visible, but often just as dangerous. If you found this exploration of ancient assassination networks fascinating, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most mysterious and covert organizations. This completes the script. Would you like to create a thumbnail, or is there anything else you need assistance with?